Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Watchful Citizen. Our guest today is State Senator Patty Pansing Brooks. I always have to spit that out.
It's a lot of words.
It's a lot of, yeah. Welcome.
Thank you
for
so much.
coming out on a cold day today.
We both got the red memo.
We do. We got the red memo today for sure.
Yeah.
How have you been?
I've been really good. Again, we've been working really hard. I'm often struck by how much work this job actually is. It's clearly not a part-time job, but it is still such a privilege. Every day I get up sometimes and I think, oh, I'm exhausted, and then I think, I only have a short time to be in this position, and I have to do, I have to work hard because I've been so kindly supported by so many people, and I feel like I really do have a mission to help our constituents and our voters to do as good a job as I can. So it's still a privilege.
And we're not in the unicameral session yet, so this is your off season. But
yes.
you're having to prepare for what's coming up in January. Does it start? And this is the long or short?
The upcoming session is the long session.
It's the long session.
So it'll last until early June.
Okay, all right.
90 days, but.
So I understand that you're doing some work on the Department of Correctional Services. Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Sure. We had, this summer, we had a group that met, a special investigative committee pursuant to LR 34. And that looked at specifically corrections and what is happening with the overcrowding. Because of a number of circumstances, I ended up leading that committee and that group. We have a formal report coming out from our committee, which is partly a combination of the entire Judiciary Committee, but it also includes some people from Revenue and Appropriations, because we were looking at the issues of overcrowding and then looking at them at how they related to understaffing, as well as programming, recidivism, behavioral and mental health, segregation, and just trying to look at all of those things and understanding what it is that we need to do to fix and deal with the overcrowding issue. Right now we're at about 137% across the state in most of the facilities, and we have got to do some work. By 2020, we have to be at 100. We're currently operating at 157%, and we need to be down at 140% by 2020 to comply with statute, or else the governor has to call a state of emergency. So we've got some real work ahead, and we were trying to look at the whole correctional system and see how we could be of support and where the true issues are. In the past administrations have basically just looked at corrections as it's a zero-sum game. We're not going to put any money towards it, and now we are having huge issues.
And that's borne out by things that have happened down in Tecumseh, where we lost
Yes.
a couple of inmates to the violence down there, and
the loss of property, the loss of people,
yes.
The continuous assaults on staff that we've had. It's become a very dangerous place for correctional officers to work. There are continuous times when the correctional officers are forced into mandatory overtime, which doesn't make it safe for them. It's also, of course, very disconcerting because they all have families. They're working hard for our state to keep us safe, and we have got to deal with these severe issues within our correctional system.
You mentioned earlier that you needed to reduce the percentage of inmates. In my research, I found that a regional treatment center for behavioral and mentally ill inmates is planned. Can you speak to that?
They have a number of different facilities planned. Again, this LR 34 study really looked at a myriad of issues, and we were looking at how the overcrowding relates to everything else. Because with the overcrowding, there are not enough behavioral health and mental health experts who are helping or giving programming to the inmates who need it. So what's happening is that we have sort of a vicious circle where people are not getting the treatment they needed. Then they go before the parole board, and the parole board says you've not received the programming, either mental health or anger issues or drug treatment. You've not received any of this programming, and so you are not going to be released even though you're parole eligible. But it's at no fault of the inmate because they can't get the programming because there's not enough people to teach the programming. And often some of the caseworkers are then moved over to do correctional officer work instead of doing their casework that they have to do with the inmates. So it's a whole vicious circle with this overcrowding. And when there's this lack of programming, then we end up having the inmates jam out. And you've heard about that. The most famous jam out was Nico Jenkins, infamous, where he got out without programming, saying he needed more help, and he ended up killing 4 people. Now that's of course the extreme, but we are not releasing safer inmates into our community if we're not giving them the programming that's necessary to make them safer and make them better and more contributing members of our society. Of course, between 96 and 98% of inmates are released into our society and will be working right next to us. So we have got to do better at making sure that that programming is accessible and available, and then help us to get to a point where our recidivism rates don't decrease. Because when you release people who are not safe to get back into the community and haven't learned how to temper or change their behavior through any kind of programming, then we're just releasing them back into the community and they'll reoffend and come right back in. And that's why our recidivism rates are high. So again, we have got a major issue. This is going to cost, the committee feels, between tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. And we are looking at a budget deficit and shortfall. And it's going to be very serious, and we are going to have to make some very serious decisions. Some people have the opinion that they want to just put people in prison and never look back and think, well, we don't have to even deal with them. If they're getting fed, that's enough. That's not enough. If you want a safe community, if you want to make sure that it's safe for our guards who are in there working day in, day out, we need to help people become better. And our prisons are to be rehabilitative institutions. And we're not rehabilitating if we're just putting them in and then releasing them back to go do the exact same thing.
So this is a multifaceted problem and needs a multifaceted approach to solving all of those problems. Is the report that you spoke of, is it focusing on some specific areas, or is it trying to address all of these problems? And what time period does it cover in terms of future planning?
Well, we've got some recommendations about when some specific things might happen. Again, we believe that Director Frakes, who is head of corrections, is a good guy. I think he's really been handed a complete mess, and he's working very hard to try to handle all these fires that are raging around him in these different areas. We have never really had a plan before this year to test the inmates and to try to find out what their highest needs are and what kind of programming they need. So they've got a new plan where they're going to be doing some assessments and looking at what is necessary for each of the inmates. Again, this will take quite a bit of time for all the inmates that they have. But this is just a huge issue, and it's not going to work to just cut more dollars to corrections. And I know we've got major issues for the state, but we cannot do it on the back of corrections.
Just briefly in summing up, can you tell me where you think the unicameral is, the other senators are, and where the governor is on corrections?
I know that people are very concerned about corrections on both sides of the aisle, and So I don't think it's a partisan issue per se, but the efforts to cut taxes by any means possible, of course, puts education and corrections at high risk. So we've got to make some really tough decisions in this next budget session and look at where we are and really make some tough decisions and priorities. So it's going to be really difficult. I can't guess how it's going to go, but I know it's going to cause a lot of consternation in the legislature.
Right. Well, good luck with that, and we'll be
Thank you.
watching.
Thank you.
Another issue that has been dealt with in the last year or so, even longer than that, is white clay. Can you tell us where White Clay, Nebraska is located and why its proximity to the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota is important?
Well, White Clay, Nebraska is a small, unincorporated census area. It's not a village. It's not a little municipality. It's not a community. It's called a census area, and that's because it has 11 people who live there. It's up in the north part of our state, northwest, and it actually was created in 1904. In the 1880s, Chester Arthur had a 50-mile buffer zone which protected the native tribe, which had been set up in Pine Ridge, which is in South Dakota, the Pine Ridge Reservation for the Oglala Lakota people. Chester Arthur created a 50-mile buffer zone beyond which alcohol could not be sold to the Native Americans. So that was in 1880. They knew even back then that Native people were predisposed to alcohol addiction. And so President Arthur kept that 50-mile buffer zone. And then in 1904, President Roosevelt was pressured by the alcohol lobby in 1904, if you think about it, it's pretty amazing, to get rid of that buffer zone. And of course, the reason that they wanted to get rid of the buffer zone was to be able to sell alcohol to the native people who are more susceptible to purchasing vast quantities.
And this particular reservation is dry.
Yes, it's a dry reservation. It has been for a long time. And so President Roosevelt got rid of the 50-mile buffer zone, and immediately 4 little communities popped up across our northern border, one of which was White Clay, Nebraska. So that has been there since 1904 to predatorily sell alcohol to the native people who are susceptible to alcoholism and thereby purchasing vast quantities of alcohol.
I knew that it had been going on for decades. I had no idea it had been going on for over a century.
Yes.
That's very interesting to know that history.
When you think about it, in the past couple decades that you refer to, there have been a lot of advocates working to try to get the stores closed and working to say that, right now there are 4 stores in this unincorporated census area of 11 people. But of course, it's only 2 blocks long, and then there's the border, and right across the border are the native people of the Pine Ridge Reservation. And so when you think about that, most recently, the statistics show that those 4 stores have sold over 3.5 million beers. And of course, they're not selling it to the 11 people who live in the area of White Clay. They're of course selling it to the native people across the border.
What is the population in Pine Ridge?
I don't have the most recent version, and Pine Ridge is a huge area, and they have 4 little towns and communities. So, okay. But there are. I'm sorry not to know that better, but we know that the 3.5 million beers, and those are not regular beers that most of us think of. These are 26-ounce beers, and they are more potent because they are about 5 to 6 of our regular beers, or I don't mean our, but just of the beers that we see in the store every day that most people
drink. More alcohol content.
Way more
per
alcohol
unit.
content per beer. And so when you think of 3.5 million beers, they're not, right now there are, any day you happen to go through White Clay, there are anywhere between 10 to 20 native people who are sitting or lying on the street in a drunken state. Now, if this were any other community in Nebraska, it would not be allowed. There are laws that would take effect and say, no, we're not going to have you selling this much beer to these people. And it's clear that with 3.5 million beers being sold, they aren't selling it to the 10 to 20 Native people who are on the street of White Clay. There's no way that they could drink that much beer. So that means bootlegging is occurring. That means illegal activities are going on. I went up there. I've gone up there a couple times now. When I went up there in May, I was able to speak with a woman who said that that there was 28,000. I was just told that 28,700 people in Pine Ridge. But
Okay.
But there's no way that all that beer is being sold to the people that are right there lying on the street. So, and when I went up there, I was told that I talked to a woman who said that it's quite often that alcohol is sold for sex up there, that there is trafficking going on, there's terrible abuse and domestic violence and all sorts of other activities like sale to minors
And fetal alcohol syndrome is,
Yes.
I think 1 in 4 babies I read is affected by that. And
1 in
that's
4
a
babies
lifelong-
are born in a bath of alcohol on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and Nebraska is complicit in that travesty. We are causing the genocide of a people. If you think of 1 in 4 babies, those are irreversible disabilities, both mental and physical, that come with fetal alcohol syndrome. And it's probably one of the most heartrending and despicable things I've seen. When I went up there, I wandered around the area of White Clay, and that's in Nebraska, not in South Dakota. And there are probably 5 areas that have mattresses lying down, garbage, feces, all sorts of things just all over. And one of the things that I cannot get out of my mind and really does sort of drive me a little bit is that I went around a stand of lilacs when I went up there in May, and it's just a gorgeous, beautiful area of Nebraska, part of the Sandhill area. And there was this gorgeous lilac stand, and I walked around, and there was a couch we walked around. Then I went around a corner of the lilac stand, and there was this huge mattresses down and garbage and clothes. And I walked a little bit closer, and right next to the mattress were 2 baby shoes just lying there. So this is not just affecting adults. I know that some people don't understand addiction very well, and they think, well, these people should just stop drinking. This is something that they're contributing to. They've made their own decision. This is free will. I actually had one of the store owners say to me, well, where's their social and moral responsibility? And I ask, where are the store owners' social and moral responsibility? And where is our social and moral responsibility as Nebraskans? Because we are accepting the tax receipts from those sales. We are complicit in this sale of alcohol to a people whom we know are particularly vulnerable, whom we turn away and say, well, that's their problem, not ours. So as I started looking at this, I decided that I know that a lot of people have worked on this, and lots of good advocacy has gone on to continue to keep this issue, as you say, for decades before us. But as I looked at it, I had a number of other legislators saying, oh, we've tried this before. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing, we can't control the sovereign nation of Pine Ridge, which is of the Ogallala Lakota people, which is true. We've tried to get the federal government to come and get involved. We've tried to get South Dakota to come and care. And so I've just focused on the abysmal situation that is White Clay, Nebraska. That's what I can have some effect on. I can say we should no longer have an area in our state where people are lying on the street, where we are profiting off the misery and degradation and hopelessness of people. And you know, I know that right now we are suing Colorado for the trickle of marijuana that is coming into our communities on the western part of the state, and yet we're just blithely and happily selling vast quantities of alcohol that is doing far more damage. Far more damage. We know 1 in 4 babies being born in a bath of alcohol. That is significant, life-changing, altering damage that we are foisting upon a people that we know is having lifelong effects. And we cannot stand up for this anymore. So I've looked at the laws very significantly. We've really looked at what the laws are regarding vulnerable people, regarding unincorporated villages, regarding, I'm trying to look at the laws regarding the Native people and how we can help. So I'm really trying to look at a multifaceted approach. We did have a study this summer, and at that study, some of the county commissioners from Sheridan County came forward and talked about the lack of law enforcement. Well, we were thrilled because one of the requirements for the Liquor Control Commission to issue licenses is adequate and sufficient law enforcement. So I've sort of had a multifaceted approach where we looked at White Clay, and one of the issues that we knew was lacking up there was law enforcement. So I've been talking about a substation of the State Patrol. But once the Sheridan County county commissioners came and said that they didn't have enough law enforcement to handle that whole area, that was a statement against interest for them, and it became clear then that the Liquor Control Commission needed to step forward and go ahead and require them to apply for their licenses again. So that's what's happened, and we are now going to have an evidentiary hearing, not we, but they will have an evidentiary hearing to prove that there is enough law enforcement, which I don't believe there is. We know continually that Sherry Wounded Foot was murdered last summer up there in August. Her brother was murdered 4 years before. Neither case has been solved, nor do we have any person of interest or suspect in custody. So we know that it's an area of lawlessness. We know that it's an area where all sorts of inappropriate activities are going on. This would not be happening in Chadron or Scottsbluff or Omaha or Lincoln. And I have just one other thing I wanted to add about that. I've heard from people, well, if you close down White Clay, then we're going to just push it all down to Chadron or to Rushville or Gordon. And I say to that, baloney. Look at there are communities that are close on Pine Ridge to Rapid City. Rapid City doesn't have people lying on the street from the Pine Ridge Reservation because they are a city of laws. They will take care of it, and they are working to help in that area. So this will not be happening. We will not allow this all to come to the other communities that are nearby, and we need to be kinder and take care of the people, and if we're causing some issues, we'd better be responsible for it and stand up.
Sounds to me like it's kind of a back doorway through this, the State Liquor Commission. And I understand there's only 3 members on that commission, is that correct?
Yes.
Are they appointed by the governor?
They are.
And do you know
yeah.
what their term is?
I don't know what the term is on that exactly. But.
So they're aware of this, and they seem to hold the key to this issue. Can you give us a little bit of a reading on where they're at? Are these folks more interested in the revenues that this generates for the state coffers, or are they starting to feel the pressure now from you and other groups about the moral side of this?
Well, I think as we know, this is a complicated issue, and I think that the people on the Liquor Control Commission have had advocates there frequently and often that have helped keep this issue before them, and so they have come to the Liquor Control Commission, but. The Liquor Control Commission is bound by their own laws, and that's part of what I've been researching too, is to look at what those laws are. They can't just out of the blue say, we're going to close the stores. There has to be due process. They have to say, yes, there is not enough law enforcement up there. No, we are not protecting the people sufficiently up there. So there's a whole process, and I think that they're looking at that. I think that they feel relieved to have some of this information and evidence now coming forward. So I think that you know, it's a very difficult situation. I'm grateful for the advocacy that's come before us. And again, I want to also look at a detox and treatment center up there. I'm looking at, we were able to get we were able to get Vero Wireless out of the kindness of their heart to go up there and put up a tower. And I've heard a couple people say, well, what good does the internet do for them? Well, the Pine Ridge Hospital, it was thrilled because they have been trying to do telehealth work and trying to connect to the Mayo Clinic to be able to access and to supplement their behavioral and mental health. And they haven't been able to do it because all they've had were the phone lines. So they are thrilled because they're now able to communicate, and they are contacted and communicating with UNMC and working with all sorts of behavioral health experts in Nebraska. So there is a lot of good that can be done. We've got to change and heal White Clay and make it a place of hope and help for our neighbors instead of just dire desperation.
I totally agree. And there's another issue that you're working on that is also sad and needs a lot of work, and that is the issue of human trafficking in Nebraska, which I think very few people are aware that we even have a problem here. But can you give us an update on the human trafficking problem in Nebraska, and is there legislation that is proposed? Okay,
last year I had a bill. We weren't quite ready on going forward. Sexual and labor trafficking is our modern day slavery. And some people don't even realize that it's happening in Nebraska. But with I-80, there's consistent proof through various different internet sites and other places that it is definitely happening here. It's probably one of the most heartrending criminal activities that I can even imagine. The more I find out, the more despicable I realize it is. And so last year, I had a bill and we passed it to make it so that the person who is trafficked is a victim and no longer a criminal. So anybody who is charged with prostitution, if there's any trafficking involved, they may not be charged with prostitution, and they are treated as a victim. The next step is coming this year, where we will be increasing the penalties for traffickers and purchasers, and I intend to increase them quite significantly. We have got to stop this activity in Nebraska. We've got to protect our young men and women. The average age of a person to first be commercially trafficked is 13. 13 years old. They're being taken from homes. They are vulnerable people who have already been sexually abused and who are running away from home and different places. The tribes often they are taken from reservations. So vulnerable people are placed in just despicable circumstances. And previously, the traffickers are the ones that generally get them out of jail because they've been treated as criminals themselves. And so they had no one to trust. And so now we're working really hard, and I'll come back and talk about that in more detail.
Yes, I'm sorry, this half an hour has gone so fast. These are interesting and important issues that face the state of Nebraska and face all of our state senators. So I wish you the very best in the next session of the unicameral.
Thank you.
And yes, I do hope that you come back soon and let us know how that all comes out.
Let you know about some of the bills that I've got coming forward and what's going on.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for all you do.
Okay, thank you. This has been another edition of The Watchful Citizen. Until the next time.